Well, good morning, everyone. Hi, it's Joan Hughes here, the President of Council on the Ageing New South Wales, and welcome to this webinar on ageing well. And we have been inundated with the numbers of people who want to join us today, so that's very exciting. It's all about aging well, staying fit and well, and we've got fantastic speakers to help us to do that. I think it's really important in these unusual times when, we're all sort of stuck in an unusual lifespan, I think. And I sometimes think about all of the things that I've been missing out on. But then, I'm so excited that we can actually connect with all of our people across New South Wales to join us on very, very important topics. So let's get going. Well, there's a lot of information out there. In fact, it's very hard to find a magazine not recommending a new diet, an exercise regime, a miracle cure. But of course, what's trickier is to find the right information. And that's the reason for this webinar. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. And I encourage all of you to find out who are the traditional custodians in your area where you live. It's very important information. I would like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to people of First Nations who are with us today. So I think many of you know what we do. So COTA New South Wales, as we prefer to call ourselves, is Council on the Ageing New South Wales. And we are the peak organisation for people over 50 in New South Wales. And what that means is a peak organisation, we are about policy and advocacy and getting change for older people in New South Wales. So we work with politicians. Sometimes that's difficult. Sometimes that isn't so difficult, but it's very important that we keep our politicians on notice about issues to do with older people. And we work with policymakers, providers, and very importantly, the media, so that your views, the views of older people, are heard and acted on. We also are involved in delivering services to older people, and you might have heard of some of our services like Legal Pathways, the Aged Care Navigator service. Living Longer, Living Stronger. We'll be talking a bit about that program today. And all of these things are very important for older people if we're going to age well and be healthy. And we've started a community speakers program, which means we can come to you or to your group and talk about all of these issues as well. Please check out our website for more information about those services. All right, a little bit of housekeeping. If you haven't been on one of these Zoom webinars or Zoom meetings before, everyone except the presenters are on mute. You aren't able to unmute yourself as this is a webinar, it's not a meeting. You can ask your own questions at any time by typing them into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. And you can also upvote someone else's question if they're asking something that you would like to know about. We'll be answering those questions during the panel discussion as best we can. And so we don't get to all of them, but we've got a few people from COTA New South Wales who will be working through those questions and trying to answer them. And sometimes we can answer them with our panelists. Sometimes we can give you a link. Sometimes it'll be just typing some information in for you. You see also at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat panel where you can make a comment during the presentation. Just to let everyone know, this event is being recorded and it will be available after the event, a little bit of promo here, on COTA New South Wales YouTube channel. And all of our other webinars are on that YouTube channel too, if you've missed out on any of them. Well, folks, as a nation, we're all living longer. We all know that. So back in 1909, when the age pension was first introduced in Australia, the life expectancy for a man was 56 years. An Australian born today, the life expectancy for people is between 80 and 85 years, and even older if you make it to 60. So that means most of us can expect more time to be healthy as long as we have the resources to pursue all of the kinds of things that we want to do to keep us well and healthy. And I think also there's a real genetic link too. So it's important to know a little bit about your genetic makeup, what diseases might have been in your your relatives. I always look at that because in my family, I am a we've had cystic fibrosis as a disease, and sadly it killed my niece at the age of 8. So when I decided to have children, my genetic makeup was very, very important to me. So I think also genes play a big part. Most of us have a list of things we want to do as we age. We want to learn about new things, whatever they might be. This is my first year of retirement. What I was going to do after March 1, I was going to travel. And of course, all of that has not happened, except I've been able to do, and I'm very grateful to travel a little bit around Tasmania and also Queensland and a bit of regional New South Wales. So that's been pretty exciting. I also have decided to reconnect with old friends that I've worked with because I've got more time now. So making new friends is important. Playing with your grandkids, if that's relevant, to your family circumstances. Spending time with old friends, walking longer. I've been walking and walking and walking more than I've ever done. So that's been terrific. Take up new hobbies, get some travel in if we can. It's all more enjoyable to do these things if we're fit and well. So today is a really, really important discussion. We have some great speakers. I'm so excited to be able to introduce them to you. And I want you to do one or two things for me. At least take 3 things from the presentation and the information you learned today. Take them away with you and put them into action. And we'll talk a little bit about how that might be happening for you after the webinar. So folks, you all got the full profiles of the speakers, and I won't go through those because it's written information which is important to know about who's speaking with you, but more importantly it's about what they've got to tell us and share with us. So I'd like to now introduce our first speaker, Dr. John Ward. He is a geriatrician with a long-standing interest in the benefits of exercise for older people in a way of preventing many diseases. He's very experienced in the area of helping people regarding falls and fractures, type 2 diabetes, depression, Parkinson's disease and cognitive decline. And he joins us from the Hunter area, and I do note that we've got some people from your area, John. So over to you. We very much look forward to you sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Joan, and thanks very much for inviting me on this critically important topic for older people. And I'm speaking from a Wabigal country and just like to pay my respects as well. I want to start just by reading the introduction to a Lancet article of this year. It was a consensus article on exercise guidelines for older people. And I thought it was probably one of the strongest and best statements I've ever seen. And they said that the failure of the health system to incorporate exercise programs into the healthcare of older people is an example of medical, scientific, and pharmaceutical industry failures to appreciate exercise's major role as a therapeutic agent to prevent and treat both disease and loss of functional capacity. And it sort of suddenly hit me there how scandalous it is that our health system really does not put an emphasis on exercise for older people. Before I talk about the advantages of exercise, in the Hunter here, when I first came here 20 years ago, we had wonderful exercise programs for older people, run largely by 2 programs, the Heart Moves program and one we ran ourselves called Active Over 50s. And both of those have sort of disintegrated as things tend to do. And so one of the things we're trying to do at the moment is reinvigorate those programs, assisted, I'd have to say, by COTA, inspired a bit by their Living Longer, Living Stronger program and helped by the manager of that program. There's hardly a problem that older people face that isn't helped by exercise. I mean, traditionally, we've always thought about cardiovascular disease, and of course, that's why the National Heart Foundation got involved and established Heart Moves. But But more recently, we've known about the effect of exercise on bone protection, on preventing fragility fractures, osteoporosis, osteopenia. And let me just divert for a minute by saying that only half of the fragility of bones is about osteoporosis. The other half is about bone architecture. And that's where exercise really comes into its own, that every time you exercise, you change the architecture of your bones. So it's not just what you can measure with a DEXA scan or some other osteoporosis measurement. There's a change going on in your bone architecture. One of the epidemics we face at the moment is type 2 diabetes. And before type 2 diabetes, there's a period in which people suffer from something more mild than that called impaired glucose tolerance. And what that exactly means is that either your fasting blood sugar or your blood sugar after a 2 hours glucose load does not quite meet the criteria for diabetes, but is above the normal levels. Now, we know that most of those people will go on to type 2 diabetes, and that so has enormous implications for our health system, but also for, of course, their future life and future health, particularly with renal disease, eye disease, neuropathies, heart disease, and so on. And there have been multiple studies around the world now that show that if you subject people who have impaired glucose tolerance to a lifestyle program that involves exercise and sensible eating that produces some degree of weight loss, that more than 60% of people over the age of 60 will not go on to diabetes in the next 3 years compared to a control group. So it's a 60% reduction, a massive reduction. And yet we really do very little, particularly here in New South Wales. I know they do a bit more in Victoria. The multiple medications that older people take for hypertension, for heart disease could all be reduced by exercise. But one of the ones that I'm particularly interested in is some of the mental health issues or the brain issues that older people suffer from or can. And we now know that exercise in most of the depressions that we see in older people, which aren't the severe melancholic depressions where you're lying in bed with the blankets pulled up over your head, not wanting to do anything, but the sort of depression where you don't feel life's worth it, it's difficult to get out of bed in the morning, there's no motivation, no pleasure. That the effect of exercise in those depressions is as good as the pills that we give people. And we know that the pills have a lot of adverse effects about them. And that's one of the wonderful things about exercise, is that it has almost no adverse effects. It has so many benefits, not just to health issues, but also to socialization, meeting people, sleeping better, eating better, better sex life, almost everything about your life with almost no side effects. We're very impressed with the effect of exercise in Parkinson's disease, and that many people find that an hour or two of good vigorous exercise in the morning, as much as an hour, will then free them up for almost the rest of the day, better than in fact some of the medication will do. Now, we're not suggesting people go off medication, but as an adjunct to medication, exercise is vitally important in Parkinson's disease. We know now that it's probably as good for mild cognitive impairment and early dementia, for brain function and halting the progress of those diseases, as the tablets that we do have for Alzheimer's disease, which are not brilliant, I'd have to say, but exercise is a very underrated part of the management of mild cognitive impairment or dementia. I don't know how many people heard the health report this week, but one thing that I had never heard before, and which is really interesting, was a researcher, I think from Queensland, talking about age-related macular degeneration. And they're now looking to exercise as a strategy to prevent or treat macular degeneration. And what he was explaining was that the muscle is not just an organ that moves your limbs and gets you moving and so on, important as that is, but it's an active endocrine organ, just like your thyroid and your adrenal gland or your pancreas, producing chemical neurotransmitters that affect other organs way beyond the muscle, and that one of the organs they found that affects is the eye. But beyond all that, I mean, these are people with diseases we're talking about. Let's just now talk about the general run of older people, although most of us, by the time we're my age, have a number of chronic diseases. But exercise is so important in terms of preventing a decline into dependence, preventing people going to residential aged care, for example, helping them to maintain themselves at home. And I always say my mantra is that you don't go into an aged care facility because you're old, you don't go because you've got a disease or because you're obese, you go to it because you're unfit, because you can't get out of a chair, because you can't get out of bed and someone can't help you. So my recommendation would be that when you're thinking about retiring, and try not to think about retiring if you can, but when you think about getting to our age, don't just think about your financial preparation for life, where you're going to live, what you're going to do. Joan wants to travel, that's wonderful, but also think about that important part of your life, how you're going to exercise. Thank you.
John, if you can just come back on video. Just one thing that you said then, and I thought, it's right. So every time I go out walking, it actually changes your bone architecture. Does it? Is that what you just said?
Yes. So, for example, we've long known that Asian women who tend to remain active late in life and still working on the stall, still helping in the family business, still very active in those sort of things, had a far lower rate of hip fractures than Western women who tend to be less active. Mm-hmm. And this was not about bone density. There was some difference in bone density, but once women hit menopause, we know that there's a decline in bone density. And ordinary weight-bearing exercise like walking or sort of dance exercise classes doesn't actually do much to reduce your rate of bone loss, but it does change your bone architecture and therefore reduces your rate of fractures. If you weight load yourself or do something that increases your ground reaction forces like stair climbing or lifting weights, resistant exercise, that's even better for your bone architecture. Mm-hmm. So we need to think about it that half your risk of fracture is about your bone density, whether you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, and half is about your bone architecture. Mm-hmm.
And John, someone also asked while you were speaking about, you mentioned something to do with pre-diabetic or pre-diabetes stage. What, just a little bit about that?
Well, we have criteria for diabetes, that your fasting blood sugar is over a certain level, or your 2-hour glucose, after you've had a 2-hour glucose challenge, we measure it after 2 hours. So there's 2 ways of measuring that defines diabetes. Now, there's a stage, not being a general practitioner, I don't know these numbers exactly, but let's just say that the normal fasting blood sugar is 5.4 or less, let's say, and diabetic fasting blood sugar is 7 or more. It's roughly around that, but not exactly. But in between 5.4 and 7, if you're in that level, then we say you have pre-diabetes or impaired glucose tolerance. Now, we know that most of these people will go on to have diabetes. But if we subject them to a lifestyle program of exercise and sensible eating so that they lose some weight, then compared to a control group, we know that 60% that people will not go on, who would have otherwise gone on diabetes, will not go on to diabetes within 3 years. And it's better than metformin as well. So exercise and sensible eating is a better way to prevent yourself going on to diabetes than even metformin, and certainly better than doing nothing.
Yes, and the other couple of messages I got out of your presentation, John, was that whole issue of medications and older people and the importance of exercise in being able to reduce some of the medications that people become very reliant on. And if people were healthier, in terms of their physical health and their mental health, then there wouldn't be such a reliance on those medications. And I think that's a very important message. Now, people are so excited about what you said, John. They think that you're disappearing, and we have to tell everyone that you're not, because after we hear all the other panelist folks out there, John will come back on and we'll be exploring some of these issues in more depth. So thanks very much, John.
Thank you, Jo.
Our next presenter, I'd like to introduce Ngaire Hobbins. And now, Ngaire is a dietitian driven by the passion. See, I like people that are driven by passion to ensure that all people moving into and enjoying their senior years, and that's all of us, can understand how different their nutritional needs are from when they were younger. It's very vital information. It can make the difference between frailty, both physically and mentally, and of course give us a longer life of independence and vitality, not to mention the love of food. So over to you, Ngaire. I have a big love for food.
Absolutely, and we should maintain that love of food our whole lives, so it's fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I am on the lands of the Murina people in Tuita, which is Tasmania, and I'm very happy to be here and very grateful to be on those lands. I just want to say thank you so much, Joan, and thank you, Megan, for inviting me. Thanks, John. Everything John says about staying active is absolutely pivotal to what I'm going to say, but I'm going to talk about food because they combine together. The one thing I need to say first off is that almost every health message you guys hear out there, Joan referred to this as well, almost every health message you hear out there, whether it's actually sometimes from public health or whether it's from the latest diet fad or the latest thing that's been on the telly about what you should be eating, almost every one of those messages are people who are 30, 40, 50, maybe into their early 60s, but that same information can actually be unhelpful or harmful if you're now moving from your late 60s on. And it's because things are different, and you must be aware of the differences and therefore be able to translate them and go, when you look at those things, go, actually, does that apply to me now or not? And I spend my time talking about why these things are different and trying to get people to understand the differences so that they can live well. First of all, we have to think about how nutrition needs change from early on and from into later life. But what Joan also said about years ago, not very long ago, most of you people who are listening now will get the fact that not very long ago, 70 was really old. 70 was the end of life. Now, the difference between that is if I see people that I see later in life, in their 80s and 90s, and what I can see is that they have undergone physical and cognitive decline that was avoidable if they'd understood the difference in their nutrition needs. So why is that different? We are designed to grow from a little baby into an adult structure. And inside us, there's a whole lot of drivers that actually mean that every time you eat something, there's messages, hormonal and nerve messages that as well as what we're doing, physical activity, but those things driving in the middle, so that every time that you eat something, there's a message: build muscle, build bone, build organs, build brain, whatever you're doing, until you become a full adult structure. And that happens all the time. And remember, every single part of you is made of food. You cannot stop eating because every part of you is made of food. So when you get to that adult structure, though, there's no drive to get any bigger, because otherwise you'd be a giant by the time you're 60, and you're not. So what happens is from that time on, you maintain. And as we said before, if you only had to make it to 70, all that build that you've done till you peak adult size, whatever that is, and whatever age that comes at, would be enough to get you through to 70. But now you've got 20, 30, maybe 40 years more than that you want to be able to make the best of, and you need to understand the difference. Now, I talk about this all the time. I've written a book, sorry about the ad in the background, it's my background thing, but I've written books on this to get this message to people so they can take something away and keep reminding themselves. And I'm going to talk about one thing because I've got 10 minutes, so it's quick. There's a whole lot of stuff here. But basically, it all comes down to what your muscles do. And that's why what John says about staying active and what I'm sure Mish is going to say about staying active is absolutely pivotal. No matter how old you are, you can always tell your muscles they're needed. And the way you do that is by doing stuff with them. Let's put that aside for a minute. The other thing about muscle is not only is it what John talked about, but it's also your reserve supply of your nutrient called protein. Now, we have to have a reserve of protein in our bodies because you're not eating 24 hours a day, but your body needs protein 24 hours a day. So what happens is that your muscles provide the reserve for those little times when you're not eating to keep your body going. And what is it used for? It's used to keep your immune system going. So you're always making immune proteins. You're always fighting off infection, even if you're not aware of it. And if you've been unwell, you're fighting off getting infections in wounds, you're stopping yourself getting the latest virus, you're helping a whole lot of things happen. And if you're not eating, those things still need to happen. The other thing that you need the protein reserve for is to keep your muscles and your organs going. So you're always maintaining cells. You're always making new heart, kidney, lung, blood, brain, whatever cells. Things are happening all the time. You're always building and maintaining, getting rid of old ones, cleaning up, getting new ones done. That needs protein, whether you're eating or not. And the third thing with actual building is that if you've done any scratch, graze, bruise, dental work, major surgery, anything that is an injury to your body, you need to repair that, and that can consume huge amounts of protein. And I'm not going to get into brain physiology at the moment because that's a whole other subject, but the other very important thing that your protein reserve is for is that protein can be converted into glucose, which is your brain's preferred fuel, and keep your brain running. So even if you're not eating, and if you don't have reserves of carbohydrate to keep your brain going, you have to have that because your brain needs it, obviously, to keep your heart beating and your lungs going, even if you don't think you're doing anything. So your muscles provide that reserve. Okay, that's perfect, because if the muscles give up a little bit of protein to do those things, and you're young, doesn't matter, because as soon as you eat, you get the muscle back again. It's those drivers tell your muscle to come back. But if you're older and you don't have all those drivers, you don't necessarily rebuild the muscle, and then your reserve is reduced, and there may come a time when you need that reserve to fight the next infection, to repair something, to keep your brain fuel going, whatever. If you don't have that reserve, you can then not be able to function as well. And that's what I see. So you can see this decline in capacity to fuel your immune system, to fight off infection, to, you're more likely to have wounds that take longer to heal, and a whole lot of other things. And that begins this decline that I see far too often, this long dwindle. That's what we want to avoid. So what do you have to do to get around that? Two things. You need to make sure that you keep telling your muscles you're needed, and that's this message over and over. John said, Mish will say, I'm sure Hugh will even say it, we'll all say it. There is no way around the fact that you have to keep doing things with them to tell them they're needed. But then as well as that, you must eat good protein food. And this is a pivotal difference between older and younger people. A 70-year-old needs 20% more protein than a 30, 40 or 50-year-old. More, not less. But so often you see all these messages that, go, oh, well, I'm older, I don't need to eat as much, and they're eating smaller amounts of protein. But that means you're not providing enough. Sure, for quite a few years, your muscles will help you out. But again, you might head for that. You might get to that time when you needed that extra protein. So you put a protein food at the center of every meal you have. And that's vitally important. And that means at breakfast, where we don't necessarily do a great job with protein, I provide information about, how you can do that. I do a few little YouTube videos where I cook things and whatever. It's really important to think about that. And then because your cells have to be able to be kept as healthy as possible and as well as possible, you need to also be providing them with substances in your food that protect them. And basically that comes from the coloured foods you eat, naturally coloured foods, fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains. Any different colour that's applied to a food actually comes from antioxidant substances and other phytochemicals that are really important to keeping your cells healthy. So you've got the protein food at the centre of your meal. Surround that with as many different colours at every time, at every opportunity as you can. The dietary guidelines, we'll talk about them possibly in the question and answer session. But those sort of things, again, remember, they're designed for younger people. Yes, eat 5 fruit and, 5 veggies and 2 fruit. Yes, great. You might be able to do that. But really, if you just think about protein and colours, you don't have to think about how many of each thing you've eaten, how many slices of bread or how many bits of this. And if you want specifics, there are tables and information to go by that you can get in that. So really, that's what's about. Stay active. You keep socially engaged. Food is absolutely a pleasure and an enjoyment. I see many people whose appetites have declined. There are ways we can work with that. That's common. It's medication related so often. So many things impact that. But basically, if we can keep people's joy in food, then people keep eating. Socialising, staying active keeps you thinking, When you socialise, often you're eating food. Perfect. Combine the two. So I've got to 10 minutes. It was quick. Sorry I babbled away, but there's so much to put into this. I usually, if I'm doing a presentation, would talk for 40 minutes and then take questions. So I've had to condense it, and I'm sorry I rushed it.
No, you didn't rush it. It was very well presented, and you can see that you're so passionate about what you do, and it's so important what you do. I think a lot of older people who are joining us today don't know that issue about needing 20% more protein. I know one person just sent a question to say, she's lost her appetite. And how do you get that back? Well, we might try and explore that when we do the Q&A panel session later. But you've absolutely inspired people in that very short period of time. So good on you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Okay. All right, folks. Thanks again, Ngaire. Now, Mish, very happy to introduce a fellow colleague, really. So Mish started her second career as a group fitness instructor and a personal trainer after a decade of teaching. And Mish is currently the Victorian, the COTA Victoria program coordinator, and we've heard about for Living Longer, Living Stronger program. She also writes on these topics. And as I said, she's a colleague of ours from COTA Victoria, and we're very happy to have you join us, Mish. So over to you about your words of wisdom regarding exercise.
Thank you so much, Joan. I'm just going to start my my presentation here. It'll keep me on track because 10 minutes is a very short time. But luckily, I've had 2 fantastic speakers before me who have really paved the way and really enjoyable. So thank you, fellow speakers, for making my job a little bit easier. Before I kick off, I just want to acknowledge the land that I stand on, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I decided in 10 minutes that I'm going to talk a little bit different because living longer, living stronger, and what's been talked a lot about today is, of course, bones and muscles, and some really important points have been made. I want to talk today about the connective tissue that runs through all our muscles and bunches up to become our ligaments and joins us all up. So it's called fascia, and it's made of the connective tissue, as I said. Now, the image on the right is all those different coloured lines. There's a man called Thomas Meyer who has done a whole lot of research, including with stripping cadavers. I always say cadavers, but I think it's cadavers, down and seeing that there are these lines that connect through our body. And so that's really important to understand when I talk about how we do it. And the second thing is that the fascia is mostly made of water, and that's a really important point too. And the third thing is that fascia loves movement in all planes. Now, what we do know is as we age, this fascia gets very sticky, and it could be one of the reasons that as we age, we have more aches and pains in the morning. Can anyone here, identify with that? Things that we used to bound out of bed and do without thinking just take that little bit longer, and that's because that fascia gets a little bit sticky and stuck as we age. So movement in all planes. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's three main planes of movement, and the one that we do the most is the sagittal, and that's the forward and backwards sort of thing. So that's our walking, it's our sitting, it's our driving, and often it's the positions that we hold in the gym as well. But the other two planes that are often forgotten about is the transverse, so that's the twisting, and of the lateral, so that is the sideways movement. So dancing and yoga and Tai Chi and all of these sort of activities are fantastic for fascia. But you might be like me in Victoria in lockdown. My yoga class is not going anymore. It's pretty hard to get to of course we can do it all online, but I know a lot of us are walking a lot more as our key activity, and that's fantastic. It is absolutely great for you. But I'm going to add 3 tips for you to add into your activities of daily living that really can focus on fascia. So the first one is, if you love to sing in the shower, that's absolutely fine. But what about starting with some of those stretches in the shower? And that's not really, stretches isn't the right word. I think the better term is mobility. So moving in different planes. So, and it's always much easier to do that with the warm water running over you. So thinking about twisting around and moving your arms up and over your head and moving to the side. That simple movement at the beginning of the day, and it's often easy to remember when we attach it to an activity that we already do, like having a shower, will really make a huge difference in your getting that fascia and that connected tissue moving. So, but of course you can still sing in the shower, no judgment here. The second tip I want to give you is that a lot of those fascia trains start under your feet. Now, I have one of these soft balls. I got it from Aldi. You know, when you go into Aldi and you come out with a chainsaw, well, I came out with a rolly ball. They sell them, but you can get them at sports shops. And I know it's really difficult to go shopping at the moment. Perhaps you've even got a golf ball, some kind of ball under your bare feet. I have this underneath my desk, and I sit and roll on my feet. Now that alone, you imagine that a lot of the fascia trains start under the ball of your feet. Just by that pricking of the fascia can allow a bit more room and movement throughout the whole fascia train. And my third tip is about hydrating, which I talked before about fascia being mostly made of water, but there's a real point of difference here, and perhaps you can appreciate this. So you've been sitting down all day and you have your bottle of water, and it's like as soon as you finish drinking it, you have to go to nip to the loo. It's like it runs all the way through you, and it's true, it does. But what we really need, our fascia really needs that hydration. And in order for it to absorb really well, it loves to be hydrated while it's moving. So there's some things that you can incorporate in your walking. Take your water bottle with you, stop and have a drink. Every time you see a bench or something that triggers your walk or reminds you. So again, attaching a new activity to something that you already do. What about adding in some of those twisting movements or lateral movements? all of these combined will really make a difference to the aches and pains that you might feel from that sticky fascia. Now let me have a look at my time. So that's my very quick session today. Let me stop my share and you might have some questions for me.
Yes, I think
Joan.
Mish, a couple of things came through when I was just trying to check a little bit of them. I do like those 3 hints that you gave. I can visualize myself in the shower, not that anyone else needs to visualize me in the shower, and think about some of those movements. I think I've never thought about that. That's a great thing. Water's always been very important to me, and I'd have to say through COVID, you know, depending on where you live, but often public toilets, because we sometimes need to go more regularly than we once did, you know, the public toilets were just dreadful. Now I've noticed a change in there's stuff to wash your hands and there's toilet paper. So I think that's a bit of a plus coming out of COVID. Everyone, you know, councils now know people are out walking and we need to have those facilities. Someone suggested using a tennis ball as well as and people love that idea about, what did you call it? The ball and feet? Is that what it's called? Yep. No, but what was the actual, like just putting it under your foot and rolling?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yes.
Especially around your heel for any Achilles issues as well. It's really, really good.
And any ball really, like what you just showed us, but a golf ball, a tennis ball, all of that. Someone just said I do stretches in bed before I get up.
Great.
Very good. That's a good thing. Yeah, it's very. Lots of people have got some people have said I've been able to go back to the gym, so that's terrific. Just being on a bike, you know, if you've got one of those bikes at home, just doing that 5 minutes, is that enough? Anyway, we'll get into more of the detail later when we open up for questions. But I've written down my hints. Thank you very much.
Good. So it's all about moving in different ways.
Moving in different ways. Yes, I'd say come back aqua aerobics. I used to love doing that. Water's terrific, isn't it? All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, our fourth speaker is a fellow colleague of mine who is on Council on the Ageing board of our Australian body. So very nice to see Hugh Mackay again. Many people will know Hugh. I'm sure we've been listening to Hugh for years, and he's been working in the area of social research for 60 years. So that can probably give you a bit of an idea of how old he is. He's told me how old he is. He might share that with you as well. Hugh also has a weekly newspaper columnist. He's been doing that for over 25 years. He's currently an honorary professor at the National University, in Canberra, and a patron of the Asylum Seekers Centre. And I think many of you might have read Hugh's latest book, but he writes a lot about the importance of people being connected, the importance of kindness. And I think during this time, we need all of us to be very kind to each other. I've seen some awful examples in my local neighbourhood of people just losing it. People are very frustrated and having to deal with a lot. So Hugh, we very much look forward to hearing from you, and we're so thankful that you've joined us, because I know how busy you are doing all the things that you do in life. So over to you, Hugh.
Thank you very much, Joan, and hello everyone. I'm sorry this has to be virtual. It'd be lovely if we were all in the same place at the same time. That'll happen one day. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from Ngunnawal country in Canberra, and also want to acknowledge how wonderful the presentations have been from my personal point of view. I've been making furious notes, and my diet and my exercise practices are going to be transformed as a result of what I've heard this morning. Well, we all know, and we need to be regularly reminded, that our well-being does depend on good dietary and good exercise practices. But it's vital to remember that there's a crucial third factor in well-being at any age, but especially as we grow older. And just since Joan has invited me to say how old I am, I'm 83, and very conscious of the fact that my well-being does depend on these three factors, not just diet and exercise, crucial though they obviously are, but also on social interaction and connectedness. We just need occasionally to remind ourselves that we all belong to a social species. That's what humans are, like many other species on the planet. We're hopeless in isolation. We need each other. We need families, neighborhoods, colleagues, groups, communities of all kinds to nurture us and sustain us and to give us that all-important sense of belonging that's so fundamental to mental and emotional health. That sense that we're being noticed, that we're being listened to, we're being appreciated, we're being included. Because we're members of a social species, our deepest social need is the need to be taken seriously in those various ways. Now, the tragedy for Western society, including Australia, the tragedy of the last 30 or 40 years is that we have been so radically reshaped by a series of social changes that most of the trends that we can observe in society over this past 30 or 40 years have been pushing us away from our sense of belonging and our sense of connectedness and have been eroding our social cohesion. I'm referring to trends like our shrinking households. Every fourth household in Australia now contains just one person. They're not all lonely, they're not all socially isolated, but the risk has been greatly increased by the explosion in the number of solo households. It'll be one household in 3 within the next 10 to 12 years. The high rate of relationship breakdown has eroded social cohesion. The falling birth rate. Kids are a kind of social lubricant in most neighbourhoods. Well, we're now producing, relative to total population, the smallest generation of kids we've ever produced. So that social lubricant is in shorter supply than ever. We're busier than ever. Joan mentioned that I'm busy. I try not to be so busy, but even in retirement, isn't it amazing how people say, I'm so busy, I don't know how I ever found time to go to work. Well, you need to ask yourself why. Busyness is a great enemy of social cohesion. So is our mobility. On average, we're moving house once every 6 years. And of course, we're more mobile in the sense that we now have universal car ownership and we come and go by car. There's much less footpath traffic than there used to be and so on. And I should also mention our enthusiastic embrace of information technology, that revolution, that paradoxical revolution that on the one hand has promised to connect us like never before, and it has, like we're doing right now, but at the same time has made it easier than ever before for us to stay away from each other as we are right now. And we know that connection via information technology lacks that absolutely a crucial ingredient of social interaction, which is eye contact. We're looking at a screen. We're not looking at each other. Well, add together those and other social trends like that, and think about the cumulative effect of those sort of changes. Obviously, we have become more socially fragmented. There is more social isolation. There is less social cohesion than we've had in the past, and there are inevitable consequences of that increased social fragmentation. You can predict without any fear of being wrong that if a society goes through that kind of period of social change of that kind, 3 things will follow. 3 epidemics will emerge, and we've got them all in Australia. And we had them before the pandemic, though the pandemic has made some of them worse. An epidemic of loneliness. 25% of Australians report feeling lonely for most of every week. An epidemic of anxiety. Around about 2 million people in any given year, about 2 million people having diagnosable anxiety disorders, and about another 2 million suffering depression. Loneliness, anxiety, depression, the triple whammy, the 3 epidemics that will always crop up in a society that becomes more fragmented. We're herd animals. Being cut off from the herd is bad for us. In our criminal justice system, solitary confinement is the worst punishment we can think of, because it is the worst punishment for members of a social species. And that's why I say that social isolation inevitably increases the risk of loneliness, anxiety and depression, but not only those things that we think of as mental illness. social isolation is also associated with an increased risk of hypertension, inflammation, cognitive decline, sleep disturbance, vulnerability to addiction. There's a long list of health hazards associated with being socially isolated. So it's no wonder, is it, that many psychologists around the Western world are now saying that social isolation is a greater threat to public health than obesity. Well, the good news is that the pandemic has arrived possibly to act as a circuit breaker in the midst of all of these changes that have been transforming us. It's reminded us of our common humanity. It's reminded us of the fact that we all exist in a shimmering, vibrating web of interconnectedness, whether we like it or not. It's reminded us that we need each other. It's reminded us that we need to make sacrifices for the common good. And like so many crises, the pandemic has the potential to bring out the best in us. The question is whether we can internalize and generalize the lessons that we're taught from something like COVID-19, where we get a heightened awareness of the risks of social isolation and an increased inclination to reach out to those at risk in our own families, in our own streets, in our own local neighbourhoods. We've been hearing about the need for the daily dose of protein, coloured food, etc., the daily dose of appropriate exercise. We do need that. Let's not forget that we also need a daily dose of face-to-face social interaction, including eye contact, if we're going to stay healthy. Thank you, Joan.
Hugh, terrific. And, you know, with all of your expertise and knowledge that you've gathered over these 60 wonderful years, how can you condense it so well into that short period of time? You are a remarkable person. You are a remarkable commentator. So thank you for that. Now, Hugh, there's been a couple of questions. People want to know, what is that poster behind you?
Yes, that's based on my new book, which is called The Kindness Revolution. And I created a 4-point care plan for promoting kindness. We might talk about kindness a bit later, but the care plan, C-A-R-E, connect. In other words, don't pass someone in the street without acknowledging that they exist. Smile and say hello. C for care. A for accept. Accept people the way they are. We're not going to change people. We have to accept them the way they are. We don't have to like them. We don't have to agree with them in order to show kindness towards them. C-A-R, R for respect. We don't respect people because they're respectable. We respect them because they're part of us. We share a common humanity. We're indivisible from each other. And E stands for engage, which is really what I've been talking about this morning. We need, for our mental health and for the well-being of the communities that we belong to, we need to engage with those communities. We need to be good neighbours. We need to be better listeners, all of those things that bring us together and promote the mental and emotional health, not just of ourselves. It's not a selfish pursuit, but we're promoting mental and emotional health in the community by doing all those things.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Hugh, the most important thing is we have seen some positive things happen through this last 18 months. And we'll talk about this a bit later in the panel discussion, but how do we keep it going? Yes. How do we keep it going? That's the big question, isn't it? Okay, thanks very much, Hugh. Just excuse me, everyone. So wonderful presentations. I hope you all agree with me. I just found them all so, in the short period of time they've given us such wonderful, wonderful information. So a quick reminder to all of you out there, you can ask your questions in the Q&A panel, and some of those questions we'll pick up in the panel discussion. But we're going to start with you, Ngaire. A good place to start always is science, as we've discovered during this period. We listened to the science. You talked a bit about, well, many of us remember the what we called, when we learned it at school, it was called the food pyramid, I think. So then we know that there you referred to the Australian guidelines around nutrition and exercise. We know those guidelines were updated in 2013, but really have they changed a great deal over the years? You know, now you're using that notion of the plate with the protein in the middle and all the colours around it. What should we be eating? And a few people have asked you questions about what are good examples of protein for breakfast, for example. People have talked a little bit about binge eating. So, yeah, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually have a little bit of a problem with the dietary guidelines and even with the plate, because really the problem is that they haven't really kept pace with them. I mean, you know, as you say, they came out in 2000 a while ago, but they're aimed at the general population. If you read into the detail in there, it says these don't apply to people over 70, 75, blah, blah, blah. But no one reads that. Everyone sees the picture in the doctor's surgery and thinks, oh, lots and lots of veggies, lots and lots of veggies. Veggies are great. Of course, they're great. But they don't apply to people who are older, and they don't differentiate and go, actually, the bit with the proteins, so the meats and the pulses and the nuts and seeds and the dairy, actually has to get a bit bigger, because you need a little bit more when you're older, the protein. Therefore, something has to give in that 100%. Probably it's the grain foods. Not that there's anything wrong with grains, but you have to focus on that protein. Now, the dietary guidelines are about to undergo another review, and I tried very hard to get on that panel to sort of go, we need something, a specific focus for older people, because there are millions and millions of people in their 65 plus that are actually potentially at risk of taking the wrong message from the generalist view that they give. So they need to change a bit. And unfortunately, I didn't get on that panel. I'm not a professor, you know, you have to be the right sort of person. But it's frustrating because I just hope that they'll see that. I mean, yes, it's great to tell children, it's great to tell young people, but we put at risk a whole bunch of people who really need slightly different information. People have asked about a few things, and the people have asked about intermittent fasting and the like. And I just want to mention one thing that I didn't say, and that comes up all the time. If you're not doing really good resistance exercise, and of course that's important and it'd be great, and everything that Mish said, I completely agree, that moving about, fabulous. And also what Hugh said about, you know, being engaged, it's so important. But if you're not doing really good resistance exercise and you lose weight and you're at later age, you are going to proportionally lose more protein, more muscle, and less fat. A young person loses more fat and less muscle, and it doesn't matter because you make up the muscle. An older person tends to lose muscle and not fat. And unfortunately, that's not helpful. So any sort of diet you take on, if it causes weight loss and you're not doing really, really good resistance exercise, it might not be helpful. That's just part of the dietary guidelines. We've always got this message of be leaner, be leaner, be leaner, but actually you have to be go, it might not apply.
But there's people keep saying, so what are good protein things for breakfast? And one of our live members is just she's just asked a question. She's too busy. She's a very busy woman. She's 92. Val Fells is out there. Hi to you, Val. She's too busy to eat, so she wants to know what sort of good protein.
And you mentioned appetite too. Appetite is bizarre. People at later age go, oh, I don't feel hungry, so I don't need to eat. But that is a mistake. It's the same as the mistakes at the opposite way around, as when I see something like a piece of cake in front of me right now and my brain says, you are very hungry, must eat. But I know I'm not hungry. I just like it. So, you know, that is a mistake. Appetite makes mistakes. Yes, if you're too busy to eat, grab something like, you know, make yourself a smoothie, a high protein smoothie. There's a few recipes on my website. I do a few little video things. Daggy they are, but you know, they're practical. And there's, you know, recipes in the book for basic high protein drinks because they're easy to drink. Or you can use one of the nutritional supplements, you'd know them, that you mix up with milk or water. And is not the perfect food, but if you're busy, it's more important that you keep yourself going. It's more important that you get the nutrients and the fluids, because your brain can't work and your body can't work if it's not adequately hydrated. Mish mentioned going to the toilet after you drink, and that's a really interesting thing that I just want to mention now, because lots of people, I often come to this and people go, I don't want to drink too much because I don't want to get up all night and have a wee. But the problem is that your bladder doesn't like concentrated urine, and if you concentrate your urine, it gets irritated and it makes you get up much more often. So, you know, it's a balance. You have to provide the fluids, but trying to reduce the fluid you take in actually might be counterproductive.
I remember the days my grandmother used to live with us for a long period of time. Wonderful, wonderful woman, inspirational. You see, she had a commode, now to me, and my father used to have to empty it in the morning when she couldn't. But I thought it was such a practical thing. People know what a commode is. You know, you just have a potty beside the bed. Pretty good. You don't have to go downstairs to go to the loo. Anyway,
exactly.
Let's not make too light of it. But Mish, over to you. We have been told that for people over 65, 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise is important. What does that mean? And what kind of exercises would you include? And we need to do it every day, right?
I think the key that we often, and it really links, Ngaire, to your work as well. It's those messages that, go out, and I think we become immune to it. Like, oh, I can't do that much exercise, so I just might not bother. So I'm going to put that on its head and ask everyone out there, what do you enjoy doing? Okay, then that's your starting point. Being active has to be joyous, and so that you continue to do it, because it can't just be, I'm going to, go on a 6-week bender with exercise. It has to be part of life. However, if I put into that food context again, and that cake thing, yes, we can't do without cake in our life. But we have to look at our exercise like a smorgasbord. So instead of feasting on, doing things that you love, that's the number one starting point, because that's going to keep you motivated to keep it up and keep you involved and keep you doing it for the long term, which is the most important thing. But then looking at, once you get that happening, well, am I being a bit of a glutton on one thing, and can I ship in some other things? And what we absolutely know, and everyone has touched on it, is that resistance training is just really, really important for bone density and for retaining muscle mass. Now, resistance training doesn't need to be at the gym. It can be body weighted exercises as well. It can be in the pool. So your aqua aerobics is just fantastic. It's so gentle on both pelvic floor and also muscles and joints as well. So it is about finding something that you enjoy doing. And I dare say that, touching into what Hugh has said as well, is that if you have genuine connections with other people who are like-minded, you're more likely to maintain and keep it up. And really, that's what we want to be doing, rather than clock watching. Have I done my 30 minutes, and have I done this, and have I done that?
Okay, thank you very much. Good advice as well. John, over to you. A couple of questions came through about, I mentioned how interested I was in that notion that your bone architecture changes if you do exercises every day. The question is, what is bone architecture?
Well, bone is made up of two components. There's the thick outside bone, and then there's the inner cancellous bone, which is sort of more like a filaments. And both of them have architecture, but it's particularly that inside bone that has architecture. So when you break your hip, it's usually the neck of the femur, that bit where there's very little thick outside bone, but a lot of inside bone. And these are filaments that cross each other, beautifully designed. And if you look at somebody who's not exercising, there are big holes and less struts, let's put it that way. But if you see somebody who's exercised a lot, there's a lot of struts and less holes. So that's the architecture. But in every bone is that sort of architecture.
Oh, okay. John, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but the COTAs have done important research. We did a report in 2018, and then we've just gone back and asked similar questions, and a new report has just been released, and it's called the State of the Older Nation report. And the latest one that we've just released, the 2021 report, said that 46% of older people, let me just rephrase it again. Report tells us that less than half, so 46% of older people manage 2 hours of exercise a week, which is less than what they said in the 2018 report. And it does worry us because as we get more confined to our homes, it's like, how do people get started? Now, Mish has told us it's so important to get out there, and picking up Hugh's point of actually going exercising, walking down to the beach with a friend, maybe then going for a swim. That's got so many benefits. But how do people get started?
Well, certainly get started in any way you want to get started, like Mish said, I think. But it's not just the things. I think one of the things about exercise is it becomes a habit. And once it becomes a habit, it's very easy to continue. Like for me and my wife, it's a daily habit. We go out to our home gym about 6 o'clock, and then we go for our 45-minute walk after that. And it's just a daily habit to get used to. I'm not quite as old as Hugh. I'm 77, but I'm still working, and I don't think I'd be working if I didn't do that every day. But anything's better than nothing. There's no doubt about that. You get up, walk around, and I say to patients, never sit for more than an hour at a time. Every hour you get up, you have a drink, you go to the toilet, look out the window, but don't sit and watch television for more than an hour at a time. But then go out in the garden, go for a walk, do this, do that. And you don't need to go and get a medical review to start to exercise. Most of my working life's been in Eastern Sydney, and we had a thing called Fitness for Seniors program, started by a wonderful OT. And it was in the late 80s, early 90s, when retirement meant you sat and watched Days of Our Lives on television. And at the end of it, we had about 9,000 people exercising, aquarobics, basketball teams, you name it. And we don't have one injury in 10 years in 9,000 people. If it's properly run by skilled fitness leaders, and that's the important thing, they've got to be skilled fitness leaders, there's very little danger. But there is also value in going and getting yourself properly trained to exercise. Now, I have a home gym, and it has resistant components, aerobic components, all the things, balance components, all you think you need to do. I was doing dolly exercises. I didn't realize that for years and years, I've been doing dolly exercises until I went and got properly trained by a guy who taught me how to lift and so on. And it's transformed my life. I can now get up off the floor like an ordinary person and all these sort of things. So there's huge advantages, and it's relieved the pains and so on. But so there is a lot of advantage in going and getting yourself properly trained to do resistance exercises.
Okay, thank you. Hugh, we want to get now into your area of expertise, but we'll start with John, I think, on a question about in the work that you do and the support that you give older people around their mental health. You must see that social connectedness is so important for people's overall health, and that idea of reducing medications, for example.
I think the tragic thing is we probably don't see the people who aren't socially connected. They're probably not even going to their GPs as much as they could, let alone coming to us as geriatricians. This is certainly one of the major issues that we've set up here in the Hunter called the Hunter Aging Alliance. We've set this up because we've largely given up on government to do the things that ought to be done for older people. So we've got to work with government to get things done. And one of the strategies that we work on is the whole issue of social isolation. And the literature suggests that the effect of this is loneliness and depression, and the mortality effect of that is probably about the same as smoking a packet of cigarettes a day. So it has a huge effect on people's morbidity and mortality. But how do you get to these people? That's the difficult thing. And how do you get to them and identify them without putting them at risk? And we know that a lot of people connected up with care packages, that's good, they're looked after. So in the event of an extreme heat day, somebody will ring them and say, get hydrated, go to a cool place, etc. What we're worried about is the people who aren't connected up at all. It's a really difficult program. Everybody wants to solve it, the police, local government, everybody, but nobody knows how to do it. But somehow we've got to identify these people. We've got to collect this data in a confidential way, which doesn't put them at risk. And then we've got to set up systems that would be like neighbourhood watch, mentoring systems within your street, your neighbourhood, but also third spaces that people can go to for socialisation. In the event of extreme heat days, they can go into some sort of cool place. There's a lot of work to be done in this area.
Okay, thank you, John. Now, the question, Hugh, that we started to talk a little bit about at the end of your presentation was, you've told us very clearly that acts of kindness are so important for our mental health, for our social connectedness, for ourselves, for our community, for our society. And it's one of the things that did come out of COVID. But of course, the question is, when we get back into some sort of normal life, but that will still be living with COVID, and people get busy again, now, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to try and keep it going?
Yeah, thanks, Joan. Well, first, I'd say let's think of kindness as the great antidote to loneliness. And two things to notice about kindness before we talk about how to keep the momentum going. One is that it's not some unusual thing. It's absolutely natural, where you could say we're hardwired for kindness. Neuroscientists who can peep into our brain in the way that psychologists and philosophers could previously only speculate about say there is a cooperative centre in the human brain. Not surprising for a social species, but since kindness is the pathway to cooperation and social harmony, which is what we need if we're going to thrive, it's sensible to say that kindness is the default position. We can get distracted from it by ego and by ambition and ruthless competition and so on, but our core nature is to be kind and cooperative. And I think of kindness as a unique form of human love. In fact, it's the one form of human love which requires no emotion at all. It's not about affection. We're not kind to people because we like them. Samuel Johnson, about 250 years ago, wrote, kindness is in our power even when fondness is not. And I love that quote. It reminds us that you don't have to like someone to be kind. You don't have to agree with them. You don't see someone in need and say, well, I can see you need a hand, but first of all, tell me how you voted in the last election. We don't qualify people. They're people. They have a need. We reach out. We don't even have to know them. Isn't that a lovely thing to know about our species, that we are the kind of species whose members are capable of kindness, even to total strangers. It's our way of being in the world when we're being true to our human nature. Now, whenever there's a crisis, COVID, the one we're all thinking about at the moment, notice how we revert to our true nature. Not everyone. Some people behave very badly, as you've suggested. Some people panic. Some people become fearful, and that produces bad behavior. But the overwhelming trend is that we do look out for each other a bit more. We do think about the frail elderly person at the end of the street who might need a hand with shopping or picking up prescriptions and something. So same with bushfires, same with floods, same with personal catastrophes. Generally speaking, we revert to our default position of being kind, cooperative people who are prepared to make little sacrifices for the benefit of other people. So I think the key point here, Joan, is that we are not talking about something odd that happened and now we'll go back to being normal. What's happened is normal. This is the human nature. And so the real question is, are we going to let ourselves, when we return to what people are talking about as the new normal, I hope it is a new normal. I hope it's not saying, oh, well, we'll just slip back into the way things were. We'll just let ourselves be the victims of all those social trends that have been fragmenting us and eroding our social cohesion. Let's resist that. We're not going to stop the trends, but let's resist the effects by acknowledging that to be true to who we really are, let's remember the lessons that the pandemic, the bushfires, the floods, all the other things teach us, and hang on to those lessons. That's who we are. Even if we're going to go back into busier lives and all those things, let's remember that at the core, we can do all these things kindly, and they won't have the terrible consequences, particularly for our mental health, that they would otherwise have. Kindness is the bridge that connects us all.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. It certainly is. And I think for some of us that have made new friends, and that's a very practical example of you've made new friends because you've met them in the park, or you've met them through a new dog, or whatever it might be, and they new people in your lives, and that's a very, very special thing. I think we talk a lot about compassion and kindness, and it always should be part of our everyday way that we cope with life. I think it's so important. Now, Mish, over to you, because we have talked a little bit about, and we are promoting one of our own one of our own services here, and Hugh particularly likes the name Living Longer, Living Stronger. But one thing about the program is that it's people exercising together. So because you've been coordinating the program, you must have seen friendships develop. There's this whole notion of not just exercising, but people making new friends.
Absolutely. And Hugh, I just say, I wish I could bottle up your advice and take a tablespoon every day. It's just, yeah, chicken soup for the soul. Thank you. Yes, so our program has been around for 20 years. I know it's relatively new in New South Wales, but it started 20 years ago, and it came off the back of really solid research that we did need an individualized strength and balance training program. And John touched on it with fitness professionals who absolutely understand the different needs that older adults have. So that was a really key one. It had to be affordable, because that is also the values of COTA. And the very third one, which is research driven, is that it had to have a community and a connection aspect. Because I talked before about, it's often, what do I do? That starting momentum is very, very difficult. And what we know is that if you don't have a connection there, it's so easy to fall off that exercise train. So that connection and that group and that community is the glue that keeps you going back. And we know that when I first started in the role, I wanted to know more about the participants. So I ran these focus groups, and it was so enlightening. And most of them came not because they saw an ad, but because someone told them about it and said, it's really good, you should come along. And then, it was this ripple effect. And so, the social inclusion is just paramount, and it's one of our key values. And for our program, many of our providers are unable to deliver the program because of the current conditions that we live in, but we do have it delivered online, and we still find that way to make connection. And I've interviewed lots of people who have transitioned from going face-to-face to going online, and they still talk about how they love when the exercise is over and the chat room stays open and people can connect. So connection is just so important, and coupled with that, obviously, focused strength and balance training.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Well, another example, as I've said to everyone, I love cooking, I love entertaining, and I love eating. And the most important aspect of that is actually being with people. And so this week in Sydney, we were allowed to go and meet 3 other friends and have a picnic outside. So we organised it. As soon as it was announced, we organised it. Well, it was raining, but we were there with our raincoats on, bottle of wine, our protein, our salads, and but the most important thing it was that being with our friends and being able to share food and share conversations about how everyone's going. So, Ngaire, I'm sure you would agree that the social aspects of all the food that you've told us we should be eating is as important in a way as the food that we're munching.
Absolutely. And I think that social connection and feeling like you're part of something, a group of people, and when you get together, you do tend to eat a little bit. If you know, the glass of wine, if people choose to have the glass of wine, make sure you have a snack with it, because, you know, that's always an opportunity. A little bit of cheese, good protein, you know, whatever. But, you know, that is so important. And when I work a lot in aged care as well. And unfortunately, the lack of connection sometimes is one of the biggest drivers. People are lonely and therefore they're not inspired, or people living on their own. And it's a great thought that people can live independently and that the government's going to support more home care packages. But sometimes I wonder whether that's always the best thing, because some people are lonely. And yes, people come in and help them do various things, but actually the community that you can see, I mean, I do talk to people in residential aged care places who say this is the best thing I've ever done. There are people to talk to and someone provides me with meals. You know, there's definitely that happens.
Yes,
so it's a mixture of those things. Sometimes it's not the perfect situation, but the other thing that I just wanted to mention, because it's been mentioned a few times, is the impact of medications. And medications can affect your appetite in so many ways. Hundreds and hundreds of medications affect appetite. I'm sure John would agree. And I always say to people, look, don't stop taking anything that's been prescribed for you, of course, but keep on asking your doctor, do I need all of them? The older you get, there may be some things that either need to be changed or that you may not need any more, depending on the situation, or can be adjusted, because they can change the taste of food, they can reduce your appetite, they can cause gastrointestinal upset, all sorts of things. Now, they're necessary, but we have to work around them, because if your appetite goes down and you eat less, you cannot keep your body going. So that connection is so important. Even if you do morning tea on Zoom or something or other, if people can set up things that can be facilitated, that's just such a, even when people are on their own, it's so important. And that kindness and compassion, and, you know, dropping a meal at the next door, you know, the door of the neighbour, or a cake or something.
Yes.
And, you know, when appetites are declining, sometimes it's using the treat foods that brings them back in. So if someone's very frail and has a tiny appetite, if I can find out what their favourite little treat is, then sometimes it might not be the perfect food. People might go, oh my goodness, you shouldn't be having that, whatever it is, chocolate or something. But sometimes just allowing that treat and allowing the appetite to go, oh, actually that's worthwhile, means that people then eat other things. So it's this engagement, and so important. So yeah,
absolutely.
There's so much more to food than just what you put in your mouth.
That's right.
We all know that.
Once I used to do volunteering for Meals on Wheels, and I used to think, and they do this more now than they used to, but it should be Wheels on Meals, you know, pick the people up, take them to a safe place, take them to a restaurant, and actually eat the food with other people around you.
There's a wonderful program called Eating with Friends that is set up in a lot of places. Certainly in Tasmania, it's done in a few of so often it's the aged care homes that do it. Not necessarily, it could be council, and people come in and sit and eat a meal together, make new friends, make connections, people who might be on their own normally. And we are very fortunate in Tasmania that we can actually do that at the moment, of course. But, you know, that's not too, eventually it'll happen. You know, that sort of thing where you bring people in together is so important too.
Yes. Hugh, we've probably answered a little bit about this, but I think people out there wouldn't realise, and we did a report this year, one of our 50 plus reports, about the prevalence of loneliness, and we discovered that the younger groups of older people, so, you know, we represent people over 50, so it was the people between 50 and 59, some of the busiest people, often still in paid work, parenting, sometimes caring for older parents and friends. And they have found that the lockdowns with COVID, the most difficult of that sort of broader older population. How do we change that experience for that age group? You've touched on it a little bit.
Yes, thanks, Joan. Just a reminder, busyness is a great barrier to social cohesion. When we get out of lockdowns and so on, and we find ourselves getting back on a treadmill, let's keep asking ourselves daily, do I need to be this busy? Am I busy in a way that's cutting me off from the necessary daily dose of personal interaction that I need? So busyness, therefore, is a great contributor to stress and anxiety. And of course, there are people who at various phases of their lives are trapped in a cycle of busyness that they can't escape from, the very people that you described, who may be still doing a full-time job and still parenting and still looking after the so-called sandwich generation, still looking after elderly or frail parents. And during lockdown, people who've been trying to carry out a full-time job and homeschool their kids. I mean, one of the silver linings of lockdown surely has been our esteem for school teachers has gone through the roof. That's a good thing. But so we can't change people's circumstances, but we can certainly change the way we respond to our circumstances. A few things I think I'd say in response to that, Joan. One is we've got to remember to be kind to ourselves. I think all of us, particularly when we're experiencing stress, whether it's during lockdown or at a more normal, in a more normal phase of social life, every day we need time to recharge the personal resources, not as a form of self-indulgence, but being a human being, being part of a social species, it's a very demanding thing. And we do need daily meditation or reading or singing or walking, not just for exercise, but for reflection as a way of recharging our batteries. Also, I think we've got to recognise that people who are feeling lonely can reach out. If a lonely person reaches out to another lonely person, then suddenly two people are not lonely. And that's an initiative that people who are lonely can take. But I think the real challenge in what we're talking about here is to those of us who are not lonely, those of us who are not feeling socially isolated, to be far more alert to the problem in our community that has been exacerbated by lockdowns, of course, but it's there all the time. And another silver lining of COVID is to remind us there are people probably in our street or in our apartment block who are permanently at risk of social isolation and its health hazards. And so if we're not in that high risk category, let's acknowledge that that's a responsibility we have to reach out to them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, we've got so many more questions to ask, and and I'm thinking, oh no, look at the time. It's well, my time says it's about 6 minutes to 12, and we try and finish at noon. I know one of our speakers, John, needs to leave right at noon, but I might just stretch it a bit. I might go 12:05, and people that know me well always know that I like to stretch it a little bit. One question that we haven't really touched on is about alcohol, and we know during this time that from some of the research we've done, older people seem to be drinking more, which is a bit of a problem. Would any of the people like to answer some question around what is it 1 glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine? Probably over to you, Ngaire, I would think. You're just on mute, Ngaire.
Yeah, no, just finding it. I was hoping John would answer, actually.
You could answer as well.
Look, I would say from a nutrition point of view that the evidence seems to show that moderate consumption, a glass of wine, a glass of beer, is not harmful. And in fact, in a lot of people, and what we have to remember, of course, as well, is the people who are now older didn't grow up in the same sort of world that some younger people did, and maybe they consumed larger amounts when they were younger, but often they didn't. Now that small amount can be an appetite stimulant, which is useful, and sometimes in my world I'm balancing what's the sort of the lesser of the evils or the better of the good things. So I would say if it improves the enjoyment of a meal and it's providing a few antioxidants, either white or red, then it's not a harm. But yes, overconsumption is obviously going to be a problem. It's not healthy for you, and you're more likely to fall over, and that's the worst thing that can happen to you. So,
okay, John,
come on, John.
Yes, over to you, John. From a medical point of view, what do you think?
Well, I certainly agree with Ngaire that for some people it's almost the only thing in their life that gives them pleasure, and taking that away just seems cruel. But you've just got to be careful that it doesn't increase as you go on towards your later years. And what I say to people is there isn't any dementia that's improved by alcohol. So that's a big no-no, because spouses will say, once he has 1 or 2 glasses, it's hard to stop him drinking more. And then he gets aggressive and verbalizing. So it's good to set up the habit early on before it gets to the stage where it's difficult to control.
John, we're going to ask you a little bit more about building muscle. I think we've probably talked a bit about that, but there's one issue that I find really hard to contend with as president of Council on the Age in New South Wales is we talk about all of these things, but what about people who can't afford to do them? You know, you mentioned before, John, about finding some of these people that are lonely, and a lot of the things that we've talked about today, you know, people do have to have the education and some resources, and I am concerned about those that don't have that. So before you leave us, can you share any wisdom around some of the things we need to do to stay well as we get older and we don't have the money to do it?
I thought you were going to ask me about my favourite topic is sarcopenia, Joan.
I was, and then I thought
I won't leave before talking about that.
Okay.
But sure, look, I think, you know, one of the biggest social issues in our society at the moment is the whole issue of housing and housing insecurity. And certainly the provision of social housing just has to be a very high government priority at the moment, far higher than it seems to be. I mean, maybe in Victoria it's better, but certainly here it's not as high a priority as it should. And we know that people that live in different forms of housing, the most insecure are the people who are in private rental, because the rental keeps going up and they're just terrified of their life. And of course, we're worried about older women who are in domestic violence situations, and less we can provide emergency or decent housing for them at the moment. But coming back to those sort of strategies we talked about for increasing connectedness, they don't necessarily need to cost anything. I mean, as Hugh said, if you can reach out to somebody else, that costs nothing. And also, if we could set up third spaces like churches and cafes and shopping centres and public parks where we had Tai Chi and exercise programs, something that costs nothing really. Maybe public exercise, a Tai Chi leader or an exercise leader costs a little bit, but surely that would be a great social investment. Providing of spaces for people to go to socialise costs very little.
Now, before you do leave, you do want to tell us about losing muscle and strength. That's your great passion. I know it makes us frail and then we're going to fall over and all of those things that come with that. So how do older people build the muscle? How do we do it?
Well, firstly, I think this is one of the big public health issues of the next 20 or 30 years, issue of sarcopenia. Now, for those who haven't heard of this word, it's a little bit like osteopenia, which means lack of bone. Sarcopenia, it just means lack of muscle or lack of lean body mass. Now, the bad news is that you start to lose muscle if you're not an exerciser, you're not physically active. This probably starts in your sort of late 20s, mid to late 20s. It's all sort of downhill after that if you're not exercising. If you're sort of an elite athlete or you keep up a fairly high level of fitness, you can keep your muscle mass really until your mid or late 40s, but after that it's fairly inevitable. But of course you come from a very high level, so it doesn't matter losing a bit of muscle then. And as we grow older, the rate of muscle loss increases. But there's two other things that increase the rate of muscle loss, and that's any chronic disease and obesity. All chronic diseases have an inflammatory component, and they release these cytokines that eat away at muscle. So no matter what chronic disease you've got, whether it's arthritis or diabetes or heart disease or respiratory disease, kidney disease, dementia, depression, whatever it is, you really do need to be thinking about preserving your muscle. And the other thing is obesity. Now, we tend to think about fat tissue as an inert tissue. It's not. It's a very active endocrine organ, releasing something like about 13 different cytokines, all but one of which tend to be catabolic for muscle, eat away at your muscle. But the good news is that almost any exercise will restore that muscle strength and increase it. Even something that's not weight loaded, even walking, dancing, so on, after about 8 weeks, you will have increased your muscle strength by about 5–10%. And when you think about you losing about 1% a year, that's giving you 5 or 10 additional independent years of life. But if you're doing special exercise to try and increase your muscle strength, like weight-loaded exercise, or increasing your ground reaction forces like rowing or stair climbing or something, then of course you can increase your muscle strength much more than that. And the frailer the person is, the more you can increase their muscle strength. That's the other beautiful thing, that if you go into a nursing home, you can almost double people's muscle strength with exercise programs. So there's no inevitability about this. It's just a matter of thinking about it and looking after it.
Okay.
May I
thank
add
you.
something to that? Do you mind?
Yes, no,
no?
go for it. No.
I often do that. Absolutely, completely, obviously agree with John and everything he says. But as far as muscle goes, I often say to people when in my talks, just find something that you can do every day. When you're carrying the shopping, just, lift your arms up a bit when it's in your arms rather than just letting it hang low. Do things like when you go to the loo, when you sit down, stand up and down a few times. That's the thing. We want to be able to get off the toilet as long as possible independently. So those big muscles in the top of your legs, they're important. So if you just do it, get yourself up and down a few times when you get out of a chair, working to make sure you do it without pushing so much with your arms. These are day-to-day things you can do. I say to people as well, if you're in a safe environment, so you've got someone to help you if you're a bit worried, put yourself gently on the floor and spend your time climbing up again. Do it over and over again. It's hard work. It's not great, but if you can do that, that's one day going to be very important to you. And every time you have to do that, you're building muscle. So they're everyday things. They're not expensive. They're just things that when you do something, you think about doing it again. Don't avoid the stairs. Take the stairs when you can. It might take you a long time to get up, but do what you can. Every little thing you do, and you go up when you're walking, walk up a hill. Don't just go on the flat.
Okay, that's probably a good time to finish this webinar. How lucky have we been to have 4 fantastic speakers? I just think it's been so worthwhile. I said to everyone out there, I want you to go away with at least 3 things you're going to put into action. I'm sure you'll have a dozen things that we want to put into action, and you have to make sure that you commit to those things and to do them daily until they become a behaviour that becomes a pattern of your everyday life. So I'm sure you'll join me in thanking very much John, Ngaire, Mish and Hugh. So from all of us out there, fantastic. Thank you so much. Stay with us, just a couple of other things. For those of you who missed some of it or want to hear it again, as I said, this is on COTA New South Wales YouTube. Please share it with your friends and family. The information we've had today is essential for all of us, Just a quick reminder, a bit of a plug again, that Living Longer, Living Stronger, the program, we've got 30 sites around New South Wales. There's plenty in Victoria. There's, I think, some in Canberra. There's some in Tassie as well. So it's a great program. As I said, we have these webinars very regularly now because we've seen how important it is, as we've all said, to connect with people with information, with people who are passionate about their expertise, their knowledge that we can share with a wider audience. As I said, we've done ones on death and dying, on the Uluru Statement from the Heart, on the financial security for single older women, and they're all on our COTA New South Wales YouTube. So please hook into those and spread the word. Our next webinar is going to be on the 21st of October. And guess what it's going to be about? Climate change. It exists. We have to know what we can do about it, and we will have some fantastic speakers. So I encourage you all to grab a bit of protein, some fruit, take it outside, go for a walk. If you pass someone, say hello to them, connect with them, and very importantly, think about those acts of kindness that we can do every day. It's good for everyone. So thanks again for joining us. I hope that I'll see you again for our next webinar, and spread the word, folks. It's very important information. So bye for now. Take good care.